At dinner, my daughter-in-law laughed in front of the entire family and said, "So, how does it feel to be an old useless fool?" I calmly set down my glass, looked her straight in the eye and smiled. "How does it feel knowing I've already stopped paying your bills?" The table went dead silent. She thought I was bluffing. She wasn't laughing anymore when her phone started ringing. That was the moment she found out I had already made one decision that would change everything. Before I tell you what happened next, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching this from tonight. I read every single one of them, and it means more to me than you know that so many of you take the time to sit with an old woman's story. Now let me tell you how a quiet Sunday dinner turned into the night I finally stopped being invisible in my own family. My name is Elizabeth. I am 75 years old, and for most of my life, I have been the kind of woman who keeps the peace. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband passed when they were still young. I worked 31 years as a bookkeeper for a small manufacturing company, the kind of job where nobody notices you until a number is wrong. I paid off my house. I saved every spare dollar. I never asked anyone for anything, and I never expected anyone to hand me anything either. That's just how I was raised. My son is the light of my life. I won't pretend otherwise. When his father died, he was only 11, and I watched him grow into a hard-working, gentle man who never once made me feel like a burden. 3 years ago, he married a woman I will simply call her for the rest of this story, because after everything that happened, I don't feel much like giving her a name at all. She was charming in the beginning, polished. The kind of woman who complimented your cooking one moment and corrected your grammar the next, so smoothly you almost didn't notice the sting. I noticed. I always notice. 75 years teaches you to read a room the way some people read a book. For the first year of their marriage, things were tolerable. She kept her comments to herself, mostly, or wrapped them in enough sugar that I could pretend not to taste the bitterness underneath. But somewhere around the second year, something shifted. My son lost his job at the plant when it downsized, and money got tight for them. Being the mother I am, I stepped in. I paid their electric bill for 4 months while he searched for new work. I covered their car insurance twice when things got especially thin. I even quietly paid down a chunk of their credit card debt, the kind of debt that comes from a lifestyle 2 people can't actually afford but refuse to admit it. I never once brought it up at the dinner table. I never once made my son feel small for needing help. That is not who I am. A mother helps because she loves, not because she wants a trophy for it. But here is the thing about people who take without gratitude. The more you give them, the more they start to believe they deserve it. And somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing my help as a gift and started treating it as an entitlement. And worse, she started treating me as though my age made me irrelevant to my own generosity. It started small. An eye roll when I offered advice about budgeting. A sigh when I asked how the bills were being managed. Comments about how some people don't understand modern finances made just loud enough for me to hear. I let it go. I told myself she was young, that she was under stress, that marriage takes adjustment for everyone involved, including in-laws. Then came the dinner that changed everything. It was a Sunday, the first Sunday of the month, which had become our standing family dinner night. I hosted it at my house, the same house I raised my children in, the same table where I had fed my son his very first solid food, where we celebrated birthdays and mourned losses and everything in between. My daughter had come with her husband and their 2 children. My son came with her. 6 of us around the table, plus my 2 grandchildren, who I adore beyond words. I had made a roast, the same recipe I've made for 40 years, the one my late husband used to request on his birthday every single year. I was proud of that meal. I had spent the whole afternoon on it, standing at that stove with my knees aching, because that is what love looks like when you are 75 and your body doesn't move the way it used to, but your heart still wants to show up for the people you cherish. The conversation started innocently enough. My daughter was talking about her promotion at work. My grandchildren were arguing sweetly about whose turn it was to pick a movie for later. And then, somehow, the conversation turned to retirement planning, of all things. My son mentioned that he and his wife had been looking into some kind of investment app, and I made an offhand comment, gentle and well-meaning, about how important it is to keep an emergency fund separate from investments, especially when you're just starting out. That's when she laughed. Not a warm laugh. Not a family laugh. A sharp, dismissive laugh that cut straight through the sound of forks against plates. "Oh, Elizabeth," she said, using my first name the way she always did. never once calling me anything closer, never once extending the warmth a daughter-in-law might. With all due respect, I don't think someone from your generation really understands how money works anymore. Things have changed. I felt my face grow warm, but I said nothing. I have learned, over 75 years, that silence can be its own kind of dignity. But she wasn't finished. She looked around the table, smiling like she was about to deliver the punchline of a joke everyone was waiting for. I mean, come on. So, how does it feel to be an old, useless fool? Giving out financial advice when you've been living off a bookkeeper's pension your whole life? The table went quiet in that particular way a room goes quiet when everyone has heard something they wish they hadn't. My daughter's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. My grandchildren, sweet souls that they are, looked confused, sensing tension they couldn't name. My son opened his mouth as if to say something, but nothing came out. He looked at his plate instead. That hurt more than her words did, if I'm honest. Not the silence from a woman I had never fully trusted, but the silence from my own son. I could have cried right there at that table. 75 years old, in my own home at my own table, over the same roast I'd made for decades, being called useless by a woman whose rent I had quietly helped cover more than once. But I didn't cry. Something in me, some old steel that I inherited from my own mother, straightened my spine instead. I set down my glass of water very slowly and deliberately. I looked at her and I smiled, the kind of smile you give someone when you already know something they don't. How does it feel? I asked her calmly, knowing I've already stopped paying your bills. The room went silent in an entirely different way this time. This wasn't confused silence. This was the silence of a bomb that had just been dropped, and everyone was waiting to see where the shrapnel would land. She blinked at me, that confident smile faltering just slightly at the edges. "What are you talking about?" she said, forcing a laugh. "You don't pay our bills." I simply took a sip of my water and let the silence stretch a little longer before I spoke again. "Don't I?" I said. "The electric bill in your name that's been on autopay from my account for 4 months. The insurance payment I made twice this year when your husband was between jobs. The credit card balance I quietly paid down last spring so the two of you wouldn't lose the car. Should I keep going, dear?" Her face went through several colors in the span of about 3 seconds. My son finally looked up, his eyes wide, clearly realizing for the first time just how much I had been shouldering without ever once making it a topic of conversation, without ever once asking for thanks. "You're bluffing," she said, though her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. "You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't just cut us off without warning." I smiled again, softer this time, almost sad. "I already have," I said. "As of the 1st of this month, every automatic payment I had set up to help the two of you has been canceled. I called the accounts myself on Wednesday, right after your last visit here, when you told me I should stay out of grown folks' business when I gently asked about your budgeting. I want you to understand something if you're new to this channel. I did not do this out of spite in that moment at the table. That decision had already been made days before, quietly, without theatrics, the way I do most important things in my life. I am not a woman who screams or slams doors. I am a woman who makes a decision in the quiet of her own kitchen, and then simply lives it out." That was when her phone rang. She looked down at it, confused, and I watched the color drain from her face as she read the caller ID. It was her landlord. Not our family, not me. The actual landlord of the apartment complex where she and my son had been renting for the past year, ever since they decided my son's income alone, after his job loss and slow recovery, wasn't enough and had quietly, without my knowledge until much later, started borrowing money from her own parents on top of my help, money that apparently had strings attached that she'd never told my son about. She stepped away from the table to answer it, her voice dropping to a tense whisper that she clearly didn't want the rest of us to hear. But the dining room isn't large, and old ears, contrary to popular belief, still work quite well. From what I could piece together, and what became fully clear over the following days, her parents had been co-signing on their lease and quietly covering a portion of the rent as a loan that she had never disclosed to my son, her own husband. When I stopped my contributions to their other expenses, it created a domino effect. Money she had been redirecting from the bills I was covering toward other things she never disclosed to anyone, dried up. Her parents, frustrated after finding out how their money had actually been used, pulled their support too. And now the rent, the actual roof over my son's head, was 2 months behind, with a formal notice already filed. She came back to the table pale as a sheet, sat down without a word, and picked at her food while my grandchildren, bless their hearts, asked why nobody was talking anymore. I didn't gloat. I want to be clear about that because I know some of you watching are expecting me to have stood up at that table and delivered some grand dramatic speech. That's not who I am, and frankly, that's not the kind of woman I respect either. I simply finished my meal, helped clear the table as I always do, and let the evening end quietly, the way most true reckonings do. Not with fireworks, but with a heavy, honest silence that everyone at that table needed to sit inside of for a while. The days that followed were harder than that dinner in some ways. My son called me the next morning, his voice tight with a mixture of shame and confusion, asking why I hadn't told him what I'd been covering for them, and why I had stopped without warning him first. I told him the truth. I told him I loved him more than my own life, but I would not continue funding a household where I was mocked at my own table for the very generosity that was keeping the lights on. I told him that a mother's love does not mean a mother's silence, and that I had spent 2 years being quiet to keep the peace, and peace built on disrespect isn't peace at all. It's just quiet suffering with better manners. He was quiet for a long time on the phone, and then he said something I will never forget. He said, "Mom, I didn't know. I didn't know how much you were doing, and I didn't know she talked to you like that when I wasn't around to hear it." That told me everything I needed to know about how many other moments there had been that I hadn't witnessed, moments where she had likely made her true feelings about me even clearer. 3 days after that dinner, she called me herself. Not my son. Her. Her voice was different this time, smaller, stripped of all its earlier bite. She told me the eviction notice was real, that they had 5 days to either pay what was owed or be out of the apartment, and that she didn't know what else to do. She asked, in a voice I had genuinely never heard her use before, if there was any way I could help. I sat with that question for a long moment before I answered. 75 years of life teaches you that the way you respond to someone begging is often more revealing of your character than anything else you'll ever do. I told her I would help, but not in the way she was expecting. I would not simply hand over money to quietly patch the hole again, the way I had for 2 years while being treated as an afterthought at best and a punchline at worst. Instead, I told her I would speak to the landlord myself, and I would offer to co-sign a short-term payment plan directly, in writing in my name with clear terms. Not a gift. Not an invisible safety net she could take for granted and disrespect in the same breath. A real documented arrangement, one where everyone involved would understand exactly what was being given and exactly what was expected in return, including basic human respect at my own dinner table. She agreed because she had no other choice, really, and I want you to know I did follow through. I am not the kind of woman who threatens and then quietly relents to spite someone the way she once tried to spite me. I met with the landlord. I helped arrange a plan that kept them housed. But I also, for the first time in my life, sat my son and his wife down together and said the words I should have said 2 years earlier, that I love deeply, but I will not fund disrespect, and that from that day forward, any help I gave would be given with clear boundaries, clear communication, and above all basic decency in return. Something shifted after that conversation. It wasn't an instant transformation because real change rarely is. But she started speaking to me differently. She started asking about my life, my history, the things I'd survived and built long before she ever knew me. My son started showing up for our Sunday dinners more present than he'd been in months, like a fog had lifted for him too. And slowly, carefully, something like real respect began to take root where mockery once lived. I share this story with you not because I want applause for standing my ground, though I'll admit it felt good, in a quiet, dignified way, to finally speak my truth after so many years of swallowing it. I share it because I know so many of you watching are older women like me, women who have spent decades giving without asking for anything back, women who have been made to feel small by people who should have been kneeling in gratitude instead. If that's you tonight, I want you to hear me clearly. Your age does not make you useless. Your quiet generosity does not make you a doormat. And your silence, however dignified, does not have to be endless. You are allowed to set a boundary, even at 75. Even after a lifetime of giving. Even at your own dinner table. If this story moved you tonight, please make sure you've liked this video and subscribed for more. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading through every single comment before I go to bed. And it warms this old heart of mine more than you could possibly know to see how many of you, from so many different corners of the world, take the time to sit with me and my story. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying until the end. And I'll see you in the next one.